Welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my amazing jet lag co-host is...
I am Amanda.
Hello. So jet lagged or not, we show up because that's our jam. We never polish our lives and only share the highlight reel. You'll get authenticity from us. It'll be messy, imperfect. Week after week, that's our jam.
Yeah, so true. The other thing that you can expect from us are progressive views and secular discussion. We believe that love is love. Vaccines do, in fact, save lives. Black Lives Matter. And he who hath no uterus shall shut the fuck up.
Exactly. Also, given the world events at the time of this recording, we want to express our support for the people of Ukraine. We stand with them and hope they soon find peace in a way that honors their sovereignty and rich and resilient history.
Yeah. There's a lot that could be said there, but we won't because that's not what today's topic is about. Today, we are talking homeschooling and science. So our topic was inspired by some Bill Nye comments about the homeschool community at large. And we have thoughts. We have a wide variety of thoughts, okay? But first, we start every episode with a recap of our weeks. So what's happening in your world, Megan?
Okay, so new location. Shock. It's like every week and a half, I feel like I say that. So we are pet sitting. I have fun wallpaper in my temporary office this week. I have little succulent cacti back there. They're not
I thought it was
succulents, they're just...
actual. Yeah, I thought it was actual shelves. I was like, wow, that's a lot of extra work on top of pet sitting. But no, okay, wallpaper, cool.
Wallpaper. Yeah, that would be a lot for me. I would have killed at least half of those by the time we left, if that's the case. Yeah, so we are waiting for our visas to fully live in Portugal to come through. So we are in the UK right now. And so we are members of Trusted Pet Sitters. And so we're on a 3-week pet sit right now, which is an amazing way to see the world on a dime. If you are looking to world school and you're like, how the hell do people afford this? Trusted Pet Sitters is pretty awesome. So the family that we are pet sitting for, they have 2 really cute dogs and a sweet little cat who's very slowly starting to welcome us. One of the dogs looks like Boo Boo Bear from Yogi Bear, and I'm pretty in love with him. Like, I want to put him in my purse when we leave. They're both adorable. Like, this little guy is just too much. So we're here for 3 weeks. They're in Thailand doing a tuk-tuk tour of all things, which sounds amazing. So yeah, so we're just kind of doing our thing. We're here for 3 weeks. I love it when we settle in somewhere for 3 weeks. We were in London last week. If you caught last week's episode, it was amazing. We had the best time. We saw shows. We shopped. I had to buy another suitcase. It was a whole situation, but it's nice just to be in one spot and like hunker. I mean, we've been watching, there's a Netflix special called Painkiller, and it's like a 6 or 8 part series about the rise of Oxy and the opioid crisis in America, but it's acted out. It's the guy, Matthew Broderick is in it. He plays Richard Sackler, who's of the awful Sackler family who owned Purdue Pharma. And so I'm watching it with the kids. I said to them, this is part of your drug education and homeschooling world. And they were like, well, we already watched Baby J by John Mulaney. And I'm like, yes, that was also part of your drug education, which was like one of the best comedy specials. And they were like, and we went to the International Church of Cannabis. And I was like, yes, we did. That was also part of your drug education. I'm like, listen, DARE didn't work when we were kids, so we're going about it differently, friends. So yeah, we've just been kind of settled in. It feels nice to just have like a steady pace to be able to chip away at my to-do list and get some stuff done. So that's good. And then I signed up for one of the world schooling pop-ups the other day. So we signed up for Bosnia this summer, which I'm pretty pumped about. So accommodation in Bosnia is really inexpensive if you can get there on points or anything like that. It's a pretty budget-friendly option if you're looking to world school. So come meet us, hang out. How about you, Amanda? I know so we referenced that you're jet lagged. Why are you jet lagged, Amanda?
Well, I'm jet lagged because I'm back home. I'm back in the bathroom. For anyone who hasn't followed us from the very beginning, I live in a quite small condo, which means I podcast from our second bathroom because it was the only available space I could claim. So we came back. We had a really great 11-week world schooling thing in Europe. And it was great, like all the ups and downs of travel and all of that jazz. It was all in there, but we had a wonderful time. And yesterday we flew back. We were supposed to come back the day before, but our flight got canceled, which was a whole thing because of strikes and protests in Munich. And so now we're back in SoCal and, just trying to manage it. Like travel is hard, right? Italy to SoCal, even with a pretty good flight, from the time we left our villa in Lucca until we got actually to our condo in the city. It was like a 25-hour travel day. It was long.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, just those kinds of things and like the packing and trying to get all the things in, right? Like you go on these trips and you have all of this time and you think like you have so much time to do all of the things. And then like the last week, you realize that there were so many things you haven't finished yet. So like you're cramming to get it all in and to do it all before you return to your regularly scheduled program. We were absolutely doing that, which meant I just felt like I was falling more and more behind, right? Like if you follow me on social media at all, you know that I haven't posted about Cyprus. I've talked about it on here. We did go to Cyprus and I'm going to get it posted. It's just not on there yet. And we went to Carnival because we were in Italy and they have Carnival and it's a huge thing. And I posted one video and I have loads more to post, but it hasn't been posted yet. There are a lot of things like Megan's waiting for my feedback on the March Patreon that needs to go out to everyone. And I'll get it done, but it hasn't been done yet, right? So that's just a lot of my life right now. There's a lot of hasn't been done yet. But yeah, generally speaking, things are good and we'll survive. We'll take it easy the next few days while we try to sort out jet lag. Being anywhere for months and then, changing time zones will be significantly more brutal than just a 1-week trip somewhere. So yeah, it'll probably be a rough week or two in our world, but that's okay. We were planning on it. We don't have too much going on here besides just catching up on life in general, which is always busy. So I'm like, we don't have much going on except for life, except a long list of to-do things that I was putting off last week that now I need to tackle. But yeah, things are good. Okay, so let's get back to our actual episode. If you Google Bill Nye Homeschool, you'll come across a slew of pissed off homeschoolers who are annoyed with statements that good old Bill has made over the years. It is fair to say that he is not pro homeschooling. He has made statements like, quote, "There is substantial evidence that homeschool does not teach science," end quote, which, I mean, to be honest, I think is pretty fair in some ways, and we'll get into that. Or, when he was asked if he considered creating a rock solid secular curriculum for homeschoolers, right? I think that's something that we're always looking for as homeschoolers. We're always looking for a new good science curriculum, especially. He replied, quote, "Use your judgment. The rest of us out here want your kids to appreciate society and the importance of working together in school and in life. A person working alone will probably not build the future 797 airplane, for example. It takes people who can work with and around other people. Carry on," end quote. So, I mean, yeah, because our kids don't socialize and they have no idea how to work with other people.
Ever. Exactly. Well, that's just it, right? I mean, that last one isn't really just a statement about science. It also just pokes at the ability of homeschoolers to assimilate into society in general. So yeah, some thoughts on that as somebody who has kids who can assimilate into society, as I know your kid as well can, and will continue to do so. So our goal today is to have an honest and balanced conversation about what science looks like for many homeschoolers. So here we go. I will start by saying that for a man of science, making sweeping generalizations about a large population is disappointing. I mean, we start our episodes with belief statements all the time, like the earth is round, vaccines save lives, the earth is more than 10,000 years old. And then you have large segments of the homeschool community who believe quite the opposite. So we acknowledge that, we get that, right? But that would be like us saying that Bill Nye and Dr. Ben Carson are the same because they're both quote unquote men of science. And P.S. I use the term very loosely with Dr. Carson when I called him a man of science. Okay. If you're listening from overseas and you don't know who that is, he's this total nut job who ran for president in the U.S. a while back, and it's not good.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Okay, so while I do think that Bill Nye would bristle at being directly compared to men of science like Carson and Dr. Oz and that nut job, Andrew Wakefield, who's all about like vaccines cause autism, I also think it drives home the point that not all scientists and doctors are the same. While I'm not big on being hypocritical, I do think as homeschoolers, we often sit around making broad, sweeping generalizations about how much better homeschool kids do and how bad brick and mortar schools are. So I think, like, generally speaking, we know that those are broad, sweeping generalizations. And we don't always personally take the time to say, hey, we know this isn't true of all homeschoolers, right? Or we know this isn't true of all brick and mortar schools. There are exceptions. There are cases. There are this, there are that. We don't do that. We make these broad sweeping generalizations when we're talking. And we also know that quotes often get pulled out of context. So I think, we need to be a little careful there. And I also think it's a little insincere for us to get our panties in a bunch about someone making sweeping generalizations about us when we do it about other people all the time. And I will say, his opinions are based on actual statistics and research. I think we have to be really careful about sitting here and saying, we're homeschoolers who believe in facts, and then but not those facts. We want alternative facts for this topic. Like, we don't like those facts and statistics, right? Like, there are some very real challenges when it comes to high-level science in the homeschooling environment and the homeschooling community. And I think it's important to admit that and acknowledge that, because it's the only way that we improve it, right? You have to admit the areas that are your weaknesses so that you can work on improving those if it's something you want to improve. We talk all the time about the fact that sometimes weaknesses are just weaknesses, and sometimes weaknesses are things that you want to work on and address and improve. So, for example, I am certain, based on the time frame when Bill Nye started spouting this stuff about homeschoolers, that he was referring to a study that came out in 2010 by Phillips, who found that only 7.7% of homeschool students chose natural science majors in college, whereas 17.8% of public school graduates and 17% of private school graduates did so. So we're talking a solid 10% difference there. And we'll put links to these stats and cite our sources, right? I'm big on that in our Facebook group, Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, because we like receipts. So
I'm in the show notes too. I didn't think of that yesterday when I was kind of jotting my notes down, but when we upload the episode, we can totally just link them right here, wherever. If you're on iTunes or Spotify or whatever, we can pop them there too.
Perfect. Megan is the one that actually uploads those. I wasn't going to be the one that committed her to doing more work. So if she says she'll do it, I trust that she'll get it done.
But you should join our Facebook group anyway, because it's really fun up there. Okay.
Totally. All right. So that same report did show that homeschool students typically complete fewer high school science courses than their non-homeschooled counterparts. On average, traditional students at Austin College completed 3.2 science courses, while homeschool students completed 1.9. So you're talking, more than a year's worth when you're actually looking at credits.
Exactly. Okay. And statistics, I shouldn't say statistics don't lie, because it's so funny. Do you ever watch, like, you could pick up 10 newspapers and watch 5 news sources, quote unquote, which a lot of our news in America is no longer news. And they all have a different unemployment rate, because it's like, oh, well, we're not including these people, or we are including this group, or we're, so statistics can actually lie. We're going with those.
There's a good discussion to be had around numbers and statistics, right? They serve a purpose.
Yeah,
they're not all as valid, but they serve a purpose. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so continuing with statistics, in a 2016 article released by the Coalition for Responsible Home Education titled New Homeschool Data Raises Questions About STEM Access, we learn that data from the National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, revealed that only 34% of homeschooled high school students had taken chemistry or physics courses. Additionally, less than half, coming in at 47%, had engaged in scientific inquiry or experiments, indicating limited exposure to the scientific method. And we'll source that as well below. So, okay. So I, as the loosey-goosey unschooler between us, I have a few hypotheses that I would like to share. Are you cool with listening to me, Amanda? Because then I'm sure you've got your own hypotheses here.
I will point and counterpoint away, but you go on with your bad self.
I did my notes for the episode yesterday when Amanda was flying, and I just left a section for her. It was like, now here you go, right? Like, just, do your thing, because I'm sure we're going to see it differently. And a lot of mine is hypothesis. It's not fact-based, right? It's just kind of what could be driving these numbers. So, okay. So my first thought is a lot of this data is 10-ish years old, right?
And more. I mean,
Yeah,
a study that came out in 2010, that data is probably 20 years old at this point.
very true. Yeah, absolutely. So OutSchool and tons of other online resources that exist now didn't exist back then. Even if you think about it, if you're saying 20 years ago, Facebook didn't exist, right? And I've often taught where was just barely,
Yeah, it was
you
just,
know,
yeah, the
exactly, right?
baby.
And I've often talked about, like, I don't know how people homeschooled before Facebook, because that's where you find your groups, your co-ops, your field trips, all that stuff is done on Facebook. And now with Meta really becoming more evil than it already was, it's like, well, how do we all congregate now? Because Facebook is the mecca for all of this. So yeah, I mean, you would have been homeschooling in a much more isolationist environment, I feel like, in those times, that it would have been harder to find resources. So if parents felt uncomfortable teaching these subjects, and that was a factor maybe in these stats. I mean, I can't teach high school level chemistry. I fully admit that. We talked about my chemistry experience a couple of weeks ago when we talked about our episode, like, when am I ever going to use this? Yes, I've never used chemistry, but I did get an A. But I'm incapable to teach my kids chemistry. There's no way. So, we were talking about this before we started recording, about how sometimes, even if something's not hard, we can still build up these mental barriers and avoid doing things that we feel uncomfortable with or that we're dreading. So yeah, I could totally see that being like, yeah, we're just going to lean into history because I'm really good at history. So
Well, I mean, I think that that's totally true, right? There's that thing 20 years ago, you didn't have virtual classes where you could pop online and watch something, like, I know, gosh, I'm really going to date myself here, but like 25 years ago, you still watched like a channel on the TV, like some weird channel, like 108 or something, and you could watch like the community college classes. But, like, it's not the same as actually like having the book and doing it at home and following along with the teacher and being able to ask questions. Or, I mean, how about subscription boxes now?
yeah,
Maybe I know in the early days of homeschooling really being a thing, in John Holt time, you could do like mail order school class stuff, but there was not the same kind of Kiwi Crate and all of these like really interesting science subscription boxes that sent cool science things to your door every month. It's just a very different environment now.
well, and if we're talking STEM in general, which was what that last article was talking about, coding was in its infancy as far as other people learning to code at that time. How easy and accessible is coding now for so many kids that they're learning Scratch when they're in early elementary school, and those seeds are being planted really, really young now, which didn't exist back then. So, I mean, the concept, to your point, right? The concept of taking class on Zoom was like going to outer space back then. It was like a moonshot. And now we have all of that. So I think that will skew the numbers a lot. If they were to redo some of these studies in 2025, I think you'd have some of that as well. Okay, my second hypothesis is that we fully acknowledge that there are homeschoolers out there who are teaching that the sun is not the center of the universe, that the earth is flat, that the earth is 6,000 years old, that dinosaurs and people lived at the same time. We know that. That's part of the reason we start our podcast every week with a value statement, so that if you're like, oh gosh, here we go, are these two part of that crowd, or can I hang here? We fully acknowledge that those people are there. They are definitely skewing the numbers. And when the study was done over the years, the reasons people homeschool has shifted. It used to be religion as number one. Now you have safety, whether it's violence in school shootings, bullying, things like that. We have people who are realizing that their neurodivergent kids are not being served in school. Neurodivergent kids are being pulled, I think, in massive number, because I'm in all the autism and homeschooling groups. So that balance of the reason people are homeschooling is shifting, which I think would also change the way kids are being taught science, because that's there. But you still have the crowd that's out there, like dinosaurs and people, we're friends. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Those people are still there. And I'm not sure that that group is shrinking in number, but I do think that they're shrinking in percentage.
percentage.
Because
We're
like
balancing
you,
the
yeah,
numbers. Yeah.
Like you said, there are more and more people who are coming in for all of the reasons you listed. There are people who are starting to homeschool specifically because they do not want religion in their
Right.
kids' education. And they're in states where religion is now a required part of public education. There are people who are coming into homeschooling because they want to make sure that their kids don't have whitewashed history and they're tired of things like slavery not being able to be covered as a bad thing in public school, right?
Right.
And
It wasn't good
those
job training, as Florida likes to tell people. Right.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
And those people, they're primed to want better science education for their kids.
Mhm.
So that percentage of people is increasing, I think. And so I do think you would see a shift in those numbers. I agree with that.
Well, and to Bill's point about, and these statistics point about those kids not having a science education, in fairness, people that are featured in like that Duggar thing, that shiny happy people that was on Amazon, right? About the IBLP and the religious extremists who are homeschooling and all that kind of stuff. They're not just unprepared for the world in science. They're unprepared for the world as a whole. They've been bubbled so tremendously. If you haven't watched Shiny Happy People, no, especially the part where they talked about the long game plan of taking over the US government. It was so sick and so it was ridiculous. You have to go watch it if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. No, it's important. It's an important watch. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay. My third and final hypothesis, and then I can't wait to hear your facts or hypotheses or whatever you prepared for today. Okay. Homeschoolers might be more inclined to follow interests. And I feel like you can tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, we are interest-led homeschoolers. I feel like even in your homeschool, Amanda, even though you're making sure your kiddo has everything that's a part of the standard education and on the standards, you're still leaning into stuff that he loves more than others, right? Like he's getting a balance of everything. And then he's allowed to go, not allowed, but encouraged or given free rein to go a little bit deeper into other stuff, right? So even if you're not an unschooler, you still might be more interest-led than a kid in brick and mortar school might be, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like part of the reason that homeschoolers homeschool, not everybody, but plenty of us do so is to avoid this concept of a one-size-fits-all education. I would say the vast majority of homeschoolers are tailoring their kids' education to meet their needs. I hope they are. If you haven't figured out how to do that yet, come talk to us, right? Come to one of our Q&As. Let's talk. If you're brand new and you're like, I'm just lucky to survive the day, come talk to us. We'll talk about how to tailor your kids' education to their specific learning style, their needs, their interests, all that kind of stuff. So
For sure.
I would say I have a 15-year-old who is wildly talented in art and is 1000% going into the art world. Okay. She's already completed her 2-year degree and will continue to do so. Do I need her to take a physics class because the one size fits all path dictates that she should take physics? Or would I rather, and she rather, take whatever time that it would have been that she took physics or chemistry or whatever it is, and take that out and say, okay, fine. Instead, you're really interested in doing this thing that relates to the thing that you're actually going to do with your life and go into. Go ahead, customize your education. So she would skew the stats because she wouldn't fit that formal science statistic that we talked about, right? But the time that she would have spent on physics was spent going so deep, like so deep into her interests that she becomes more ridiculously overprepared for the world that she's actually going to enter into. And then from an unschooling perspective, I would not argue because that's like argumentative for nothing, but like I would put out there, right? She has gone into so much science through art, like so much science. I mean, she's a fiber artist, right? So the proteins and fibers, I mean, every animal, right? Even from sheep breed to sheep breed, and then you go into alpacas and llamas and, cashmere goats and all this kind of stuff. The protein molecules and the fibers are all very different. And it changes the way you dye things. It changes the chemicals that you dye things. I mean, all this kind of stuff. And you're using mordants and all these things. She's got chemistry, but it's not going to show up as a year of chemistry in a statistics search. So I feel like sometimes maybe that customization is throwing those stats off. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. If you have a kid who totally knows what their interests are and you're going that way, go for it. I mean,
Okay. And now that's going to be one of those areas where Megan and I mostly disagree. And that's okay, because if you're new to our podcast, right, this is, I think, one of the big strengths of our specific podcast. I am an aggressive academic homeschooler, and there are plenty of topics that Megan and I respectfully disagree on because, as she was just talking about, she's quite a loosey-goosey unschooler, and I'm very much not.
Can I just say though, like you said, it's one of the strengths of our podcast. So I met up with some friends when we were in London, and I was telling Amanda they brought somebody to a coffee date one time. They were all going to go to a museum, and in conversation, I said something about the podcast, and she was like, "What's your podcast?" I told her, and she goes, "Are you the one where you're both like totally different?" So I think other people think that that's like a strength, or at least a standout point of our podcast as well. You know, that you can come and get two really wide viewpoints without it turning into a bloodbath.
Yes, no blood needs to be shed. I do have some thoughts, and actually my first point is almost the same as Megan's, but from the other side of it. But before we go there, we do just want to quickly invite you to join our Patreon. If you enjoy our content, it is a great budget-friendly way to get even more, secular, progressive homeschooling resources and support, while also supporting our podcast, right? That's a really big thing right now, is supporting those small local businesses and the people who are putting information out there that you really appreciate. We're probably not all putting our money towards WAPO right now, or, one of those other less ideal news sources. We would love for you to come support us. We offer 3 levels of support, everything from, I really like what you're doing, keep up the good work, right, to things that provide monthly unit studies that are themed to go along with something happening in that particular month. And then we have live meetings. In our live sessions, we offer homeschool advice and support, as well as there's one that's just for an opportunity to like socialize with like-minded homeschool parents and ask questions. It can be about things you're wanting to do in your home with your kids or whatever. It can also be completely not related, and just that actual like grown-up time to talk with other grown-ups, which Lord knows we all need it, right?
Feels good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we will pop a link to our Patreon and a coupon code in our show notes. We try to keep a coupon code so everyone can try it out for, somewhere around $1, no matter what level you're at for the first month. So definitely use it. Come check it out. Hopefully you'll like hanging out with us, and we would love to welcome you.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. So back to the science. So, yeah, my first point would be that there are a lot of homeschoolers who just simply don't think true lab sciences are important in life, and therefore don't require their kids to take those classes. My style of homeschooling doesn't agree with that, right? I think it's really important to take those with the understanding that, yes, you're not going to learn all of those things. You're not going to remember all of those things, but that's not the point of taking it in lower grades. Like it's just a foundation. It's extra knowledge to be able to build off of. And at some point in your life, you might revisit it, and it'll be helpful to have that like basic foundational knowledge there. I see it often in homeschooling groups, right? I see this exact thing. There'll be entire discussions about how to set up a high school transcript that reflects science credits without any or very little traditional science classes. And I, like I said, I do personally think that this is a real problem. I think we want to be taken seriously. We want people to consider the education we provide our kids equal to, and a lot of times we really want it to be considered superior to what they would get in a traditional brick and mortar school. And yet we are leaving off a huge chunk of lab sciences. And I think that really hurts our position of like, hey, we do a great job homeschooling, even though we leave out this massive thing that they do in regular brick and mortar schools.
World where science denial is growing, or at least in
Yeah.
American culture. I don't know about the rest of the world as much as I do in America, but in America, science denial is on the rise.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, I feel like this is just one of those things, right? We really need to be careful about that. And if we're not teaching it in our own home, then how can we, we're not really walking the talk, I feel. All right. So my second point would be, I think one of the big struggles is just the cost of labs, access to materials, and access to those classes. And this is a bigger problem in the homeschool community in general, I think. It's not cheap to recreate high school science at home. I loved science. I know you said you didn't really enjoy it, but you got a good grade in it. Like high school chemistry, it's fun. I think you go into the big lab, your teacher does some kind of crazy cool experiment to like get all the kids like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Or to get teenagers to be like, let's go to the lab and try to blow something up, right? Like you're trying to do that in your own home. There's no point where you're like, hey, let's see what we can blow up in the kitchen. And those kitchen science experiments you see all the time. I see it all the time of like, you can do all of these with just simple ingredients from the kitchen. Like baking soda or baking powder is not as cool as the other things that you can do, right? Like it's not the same. But even beyond that, if you did want to try to make it the same, it's not cheap. If you're going to be trying to buy all the flasks and the beakers and the Bunsen burners to do all of the experiments in your own home, whether you have an outdoor space or you're trying to do it in your condo kitchen and worried about setting off the fire alarm for the entire building, it's all more challenging, more expensive. It's hard. Like it's just hard. I know for me personally, I wanted my kiddo to do this like middle school dissection thing that our local aquarium was hosting. I'm like, oh, this will be great. I have no desire to do dissection personally. When I was in school and had to do dissection, I always got a lab partner who was super excited about doing the dissection. And I'm like, this is perfect. You dissect away, you draw the pictures. I will write us a report. I promise we'll get an A. It's not my thing. But I looked into this class and it was between $300 and $400 for a single day. Like, come on. Like, we will spend quite a bit of money to outsource things. We'll spend quite a bit if it's just something my kiddo is really excited about doing. But like $300 to $400 for a single science thing, it's not even going to count as a semester class. Like, there's so much more that needs to be done. That's just a one-off. That's cost prohibitive. It's really cost prohibitive. Yeah. And then, good science curriculum, I think it's hard to find. You can outsource, and it is important to outsource for a lot of things. It's not the same, especially if it's a virtual class. Again, it's that thing. It's fun to watch things blow up and explode. Like elephant toothpaste is fun on TV, but it's not going to be nearly as fun as if you were sitting in the classroom and elephant toothpaste took off. It's not the same. And I was just working on our list of like curriculums that you're not allowed to share or mention in our Facebook group. And the number of science curriculums on there that aren't, they're completely religious or they're neutral at best. Actual secular science curriculum, it's hard to find. And I don't really understand. Like, I don't understand what they're doing to chemistry that's made it not secular, but it's a reality and it's a real problem. I think like it's something we have to continue to work on.
So wouldn't it have been nice, instead of issuing a snarky comment about 797s, if Bill Nye had been like, because he could do a mail away kit where it's like, here's your ninth grade, all the chemicals that you need and all that. And because he could buy it in such volume and then send it out, and he could do online classes that are pre-recorded, or he could hire a teacher. Wouldn't that have been great? All those years ago, we could have stemmed this problem, because I'm telling you, I learned more from Bill Nye videos homeschooling my own kids than I did in science in high school. So he could do it.
He could, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say Bill Nye's never going to listen to our episode. So hopefully I'm not offending him here. But, Bill Nye's kind of like your grandma or your grandpa, where you're like, I wish they hadn't said that. But for the most part, their heart's in the right place. I have great hope for the many scientists who have worked with and under Bill Nye. For example, Emily Calandrelli, she is awesome. She's amazing. And she has put out a lot of great things, everything from like her experiment books to she does live videos on, well, they're not, she recorded them live. They're not live, but they're on YouTube Kids, right? She has all of these things. Just a couple weeks ago, she put out her video of her space flight, and it documents everything leading up to it, everything after. She talks about reusable rockets and the difference and the science that she was doing there. And she put out questions, talk about this with your students or with your kids. And she has often talked about, would there be a market for a, a kit, like a subscription box type of thing or something like that. I think she's early enough in the process that it's been a bit cost prohibitive and she hasn't really completely dug in, but she's finding other ways to put this out, to make science accessible and to do a good job with science. And so I'm optimistic that while we may not get it from science grandpa, we might get it from the people that he mentored, the folks that are coming up with the homeschoolers now instead of watching what homeschooling was.
That makes sense. Here's hoping.
Yeah, here's hoping. That's one of my personal things. I'm going to keep working on that. That's going to be a goal of mine. Okay, so I'm going to say, as much as I have taken the stance of like, we really do need to work on science, because I really do believe that. I firmly believe that as homeschoolers, we do need to do better. This is an area where the numbers say we need to do better, and I'm all about us doing better. I do wonder a bit about the validity of the statistics. I have seen this, again, I have no actual numbers to support this data. This is based on what I have seen. If your kid is super into science, it seems more likely that parents decide to leave them in school or put them back into some kind of brick and mortar school. I've seen it a lot in the groups that I'm in where their kids are really hungry for that. And that's the thing that they're like, I can't recreate a home science lab, so I'm going to leave them there. That's what they want. That's what they need. Maybe they're looking at a special STEM school. They're looking at a magnet school. They might be doing a private school. But it seems like there's a tendency for those kids who are really into those certain types of sciences, for the parents to play around with the idea of homeschooling, to maybe even homeschool some like in middle school. And then a lot of times they go back for high school science so that they can then use that to go into college level.
I was thinking about it while you were just saying that, and I hadn't thought about it until you brought that up, but that was kind of one of the trends in homeschooling for so long, right? Homeschooling until high school, and that people thinking that they couldn't homeschool their high schooler in order for them to get the education that they needed for them to go to college. And whether or not that was true at the time, or whether or not it was just the perception at the time. But yeah, so that I think would skew because it's kind of one of those things in the homeschool world. It's kind of like, but what about socialization? It's like, well, you'll only homeschool through high school, right? And then clearly when shit gets real, you're going to put them back in school. And I think that knee-jerk reaction comes from the fact that was a trend for a while. And I think more and more people are homeschooling high school now.
I mean, exactly. I thought that, right? When we decided like, okay, yes, we're going to do this homeschool thing. I was like, yeah, but we'll probably send in to the school. We're really close to two fantastic high schools. Like, our elementary schools, not so much, but the high schools that you have to like test and get into and all of that jazz, because we're in a city. So it's not as simple as like you're zoned for this school. One of them is not great. We have three, literally within 2 blocks of our condo. We have 3 schools, and 2 of them are phenomenal. I thought for sure we would send him to one of those 2 schools. At this point, he's officially, technically on paper in 5th grade. And he just finished a whole bunch of 12th grade modules. I had talked about that in a previous episode. Like, I don't think he would actually be happy going into high school when he's age appropriate for going into those high schools. So, there are a lot of families who aren't going to be in that position. A lot of families who decide that doesn't matter so much. They have other things that they want them to be able to do or other priorities. And so I do think that skews it. I also think you have a group of parents who are choosing to put their kids back in school or keep their kids in brick and mortar school for the sciences because they're interested in sciences. And I do think that's a real number that's going to skew the results a little. And I think that a lot of modern homeschool kids are absolutely encouraged to follow whatever unique path most interests them. And that means that they have a lot more options than a kid in a more traditional system. So I feel like this point is different from that first point that I made where like, well, you don't have to because you're going to go into something else that's not at all related to this. And so you don't need to do science. But this is more, if you're in a regular brick and mortar school, you kind of have 10 options ahead of you because of the classes that you've taken and things have been laid out and here are your options, pick from them. If you're homeschooling, you don't have, here are your 10 options that you can
10,000.
study.
Right.
Yeah, you have as many things as you want. And so it does stand to reason that that would lower the stats at least a little, just because there are so many more options. You're not going to have the same kind of numerical breakdown as you would with a much smaller selection.
Regarding that, I think it was that god awful John Holt book that we read where he talked about the economics of being forced to learn a second language. And I say learn very loosely because most of us took 2 years of the language and don't speak that language at all. And the US is one of these countries that have this requirement to graduate, but also have the lowest or one of the lowest percentages or statistics of people who speak more than one language. And so he talked about the economics of that, right? Like if you had a kid who was super into, I'll use art just because it's the world that I know because of one of my kids, right? Like, let's say you have a kid that's super into sculpting, and instead of that kid taking chemistry or whatever the case might be, they're taking anatomy and physiology as a dual enrollment class or something, because by learning anatomy and physiology, it strengthens their ability to sculpt more realistically. And so it's like the economic impact of that 2 years of language. His point was, well, what could we have kids doing that would actually be fruitful and useful? I mean, if they were actually learning the language, that would be great, but most aren't. It's kind of the same thing, right? To your point, like if you have a kid who's hell-bent on journalism, and that is where they are going and what they are doing, what is the economic impact? What is their ability to hit the ground running and get into a good school and all that, if they take that year of chemistry and that year of physics and swap it out for something that actually relates to what they are doing.
Yeah, but I think that goes more to your point about unschooling and interest-led learning and that sort of thing. My point is more, if you have a million things that you can go into, statistically, how many of them go into a liberal arts degree? Well, a lot more of them are probably going to go into a liberal arts degree because whatever random thing they found out there lines up more with a liberal arts degree. And you may have a larger percentage of homeschool students who go into a trade school because they have done apprenticeships or they want to do apprenticeships or things like that. And so it's not so much that they're not, it's that they have more options, and those options are defined as something other than natural sciences, right? Natural sciences is very limited. You don't pick some random interest that you want to go into and go get a natural sciences degree. Like those are intense degrees to get. And so I wonder how much of that is the vast number of options and how those kind of code when you force them to be coded as like a traditional college degree program.
Makes sense. I didn't quite track that the first time you said it, but I'm sure it was me.
It was also back to the beginning, jet lagged Amanda. So I may not be being super clear.
Well, my brain was also kind of thinking about the fact that, and this is not new, this has been going on for about a year and a half, but I was thinking about what you were saying about your kiddo attempting to assimilate into a high school at this point would be the most frustrating and fruitless thing possible, because by the time he would enter ninth grade, he's well beyond ninth grade. And I don't think that's uncommon in the homeschool world.
No,
that's not to say it's across the board, the homeschool world.
No.
If you have a kid that is doing grade level work, if you have a kid that is not doing grade level work and is working at their own pace, that is okay. We do not want you to walk away from this episode and be like, oh my gosh, I'm completely failing as a homeschool parent.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with doing grade level work. There is nothing wrong with a kid who needs time to work at their own pace and isn't at grade level. As long as they're making steady gains, you're good. It's okay, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, you want to figure out why they're not. Dig in, diagnosis, blah, blah, blah. Our book that we're starting this week is called Differently Wired. You're going to want to listen to that, right? But that's okay. But I was thinking about what you were saying, because for a year and a half-ish now, we've been having this conversation about my 15-year-old. She's almost 16. The same is happening with college, right?
Mhm.
Where she's been allowed and given the free rein to go so deep in her pre-college years that you go to college and your first semester of classes is like introduction to this new world. And she's like, I have gone 20 times deeper than your introduction to the new world. What am I supposed to do here? To the point that we've looked at schools like Brown and Hampshire about her just being able to kind of create her own degree, because what the heck is she supposed to do? So if you've been in that position with your kids, please come and talk to me, because we've been in a circular debate about this for a year and a half. Think about what on earth to do, but it can happen.
Yeah, that's it. So I don't know how much these things actually skew the stats, but I think they probably do, right? Some. I will say, statistically, we know homeschoolers do well in university, career, and life. And we also know they are less well represented in the natural sciences. We have the numbers that show that. And I think it's probably a loss for society as a whole. So, we pride ourselves on our extraordinary critical thinking skills, and we pride ourselves on the fact that homeschool kids can really think outside the box and get creative with their solutions. And I think every field, but especially the natural sciences, needs that.
Yeah.
So, maybe while we're researching non-whitewashed history curriculum and classes, maybe we also need to be doing a bit more research on the science classes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Random thought. But just because as we're having this conversation, it popped into my head, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, the statistics say that compared to traditionally school kids, public school kids, brick and mortar kids, homeschool kids are missing these sciences, right? Or don't have as much science. And one of my points was that parents might feel ill-equipped to teach their kids these subjects. But the interesting thing is that statistic is saying, okay, when these people, let's say us, me and you, right? When we got to college, we got a check on the statistics counter, right? I took chemistry, truth. I took biology, truth. I don't even remember what other sciences I took. I know I took biology and chemistry. I did go to a religious girls' school. I might not have taken more. There had to have been a third year of science in there. I just don't, maybe earth science or something. I don't know. Anyway, that shows you what an indelible mark it made. So anyway, okay, fine. I showed up to college. I would have gotten that check in the statistics column. But if we have this swath of parents who don't feel equipped to teach their kids science, and it could be because of equipment and money and things like that as well. Maybe they feel completely competent, completely equipped, but it's unattainable for other reasons, right? But how good was it just going to the lab to blow stuff up, right? Because it was fun and cool, and it was better than being in math or literature class, But did they actually learn enough to do something with it? I guess yes, because we're underrepresented in the field itself as homeschoolers. But it does make me think, just because you took it in your traditional education doesn't mean you know shit about science.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the goal would be that you understand how science works, and that you are able to look at a meme on Facebook and be like, that's not real, right? Like, that you can see these things, and you just, you have enough of a foundation that you're not like, oh, that's right, that chemical, like the lady that keeps doing I don't know if you've seen them. There's these TikTok videos where she looks at a box of cereal and she's like, oh, it's got this in it. And then she walks to the hardware store and is like, look at this chemical. It's the same one that was in the cereal. Okay, but my basic chemistry told me that lots of things are made of oxygen. Lots of things are made of specific kinds of salt. So it, you should stop consuming oxygen and such chemicals, right? I mean, hydrogen, oxygen, the combination is maybe so bad, right? So, I mean, I think for me, right, there are lots of things, right? Chemistry, I do not feel in any way, shape, or form prepared to teach chemistry right now at this point. I would need a really good curriculum that had a good open and go teacher's manual to be able to do it. But I took chemistry in college as well. I mean, that's a whole other story. It's kind of funny, but we won't go into it today. But also, it's been 25 years since I took it. And I don't think we expect anyone to be particularly great at something that they haven't done in 25 years. I mean, even getting on a bicycle is going to take some warm up, right?
So if you are homeschooling and maybe you're new to homeschooling, right? And you're sitting there going, oh crap, what did I do? Now my kid could never be a scientist and can never go to space and can never cure cancer. Okay, that is not true. So I shouldn't say end our episode, but to slowly start winding this down, some examples of homeschoolers in science. Okay. And I'm going to do my best with names, but Amanda and I both talk about the fact that we really stink at pronouncing people's names properly. First example, Dr. Sho Yano, a physician who earned a PhD in molecular genetics and cell biology at 18, a PhD at 18, and became the youngest person to graduate with an MD from the University of Chicago at 21. He began his residency in pediatric neurology at Comer Children's Hospital in 2012, and he was homeschooled all the way through the 12th grade. Boom. Okay, next example, Dr. Eric Demain, professor of computer science at MIT, recognized for work in theoretical computer science, particularly computational geometry. Don't I sound like I know what I'm talking about when I read that out?
Oh, yeah.
You go. He became a MacArthur Fellow in 2003 and has his mathematical origami artwork in the Museum of Modern Art's permanent collection. So this part I thought was really, really interesting. He was homeschooled by his father, who had a high school diploma. That was his father's highest level of education. And they don't specifically use the term unschooling, but it says his father instructed him for as little as an hour each day out of textbooks that he had borrowed from a group of Seventh-day Adventists. So this was not a situation where he had access to, a tremendous amount of, sounds largely interest-led, right?
Yeah.
So that one was interesting to me as an unschooler. Okay. Lastly, Dr. Agnes Mary Clerk, an Irish astronomer and writer known for her influential work called A Popular History of Astronomy during the 19th century. Her contributions significantly impacted the field of astronomy, and she was homeschooled her entire life. So it is 100% possible. And Dr. Agnes Mary Clerk was not taking online classes on Zoom in the 1800s. So you've got more resources at your disposal than her parents had. You've got more resources at your disposal than her parents had.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing, right? You have both camps. When you're homeschooling, you definitely have people who are homeschooling prodigies in all things, and that can also include the sciences. We definitely hear about the real life Doogie Housers and, and those kinds of things. They're there. But also there are just regular kids who like science, and you can homeschool them and they can go into this. And I think, the biggest takeaway is don't let the fear of not being able to teach them science prevent you from teaching them science, right? There are lots of resources. We can't talk about it today because then our episode would be like 3 hours long, and we really try not to do that to people. But at some point we will come back and do some real in-depth looking and researching and discussion around science for homeschooling. I think that, we're covering a lot of different things. And I think this is a hugely important one. We'll talk about some different curriculums and options and ways to access the science. If you, say, live in a condo and don't want it setting off all the sprinklers and fire alarms in your building, we'll look at ways to do that without, putting your insurance policy at risk. And because you can, right? And again, Meagan kind of talked about it before, and sometimes we do talk a lot. We use a lot of our own experiences with our own kids, and our kids are both twice exceptional. So it does mean that while we disagree about a lot of things, we're in a similar position where our kids are working ahead of grade level on a lot of things and in a lot of different ways. That doesn't mean that your kid has to be above grade level. They can absolutely be just moving along at that standard pace and hitting all the common core things because that's what you want to do. And you want them to ultimately go on to college, and they want to go on to college in science. That's okay. And you can totally do that as a homeschool parent. It might take a little bit more work than if they were just in a regular brick and mortar school, but we know why we're doing it. And for the most part, we all signed up for a little bit more work because we know it makes our kids that much happier, that much healthier. And I don't know. Again, anytime I say I feel like I have to be careful about that, but I don't know.
It's a Bill Nye if you do that. You're going to cancel the flip bill. All of these people, all homeschoolers are shit
Everyone.
at science.
But I feel like every homeschooling caregiver really wants what's best for their kiddo. I don't think there are many people out there that are like, hey, I'm going to keep them home with me all the time so that I can turn them into a terrible human being who can't survive in the world I want them to go into. Even the long denim skirt crowd, they want their kids to be the best version of themselves in the world in which they envision them living in, right? So we're all trying. And if you need more resources, like come join our group, come to a talk, or find your own people. If you've listened to us and you're like, that was a great episode, but they're way too progressive for me, that's okay. Go find your own people. There are groups out there for everyone. And ask for the resources. They're there.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So, and there are some really great online resources for advanced science classes. But then on top of it, you've got dual enrollment. I mean, dual enrollment is such an amazing option for, in most states, you can start dual enrollment either at high school, at ninth grade in the US, or as a junior. I'm not sure how it works in other places. If you live someplace else, tell us how it works in the comments. We always love hearing about different homeschooling processes around the world. But yeah, I mean, dual enrollment is positively amazing. So tell us, how are you implementing sciences at any age, not just high school? If you have this amazing tip for how you're doing lab sciences, come share. That's a huge part of the homeschooling community. Part of the reason we do this podcast is because when I started homeschooling, there were all these veteran homeschool moms who were like, come here, I'll tell you how it works. And that's part of the reason we do it, is like all those veteran moms, they're done. Their kids are off, they're gone. And one day you kind of have this realization that I am those people now. Oh, okay. Now it's our job to kind of be like, all right, new people, here's how it works. So we're all about sharing. If you've got some amazing trick of how you're doing lab sciences, come and tell us. Before we go, we would love to ask you to give us a like, a follow, a review, wherever you're listening to us. I promise you we're not needy and insecure people, but the reality of podcasting is it's all about keeping the algorithm happy so that our podcast gets put on a silver platter in front of the people who should be seeing it. So if you could take just a couple of seconds and acknowledge our podcast in some way, shape, or form, a comment, a like, a follow, or review, whatever, it goes a really long way. And we super duper appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we try to wrap up our regular episodes with a mantra. So we've got a mantra for you today. Science thrives on curiosity, not broad brushstrokes. Let's challenge assumptions, embrace nuance, and keep proving that homeschoolers, like scientists, come in all varieties.
Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us today. We will have a new book club episode for you this Thursday, and we are starting a brand new book. In the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.